was the only one who came to my husband's funeral. A long stretch of empty pews sat quietly in front of me as I stood beside Jeremiah's mahogany casket. Our children, Kalen with his wife, and Anaya, had chosen vacations and trips over, saying a final goodbye to the man who raised them. Before we go any further, remember to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. The funeral home director, a young man who looked barely older than a college graduate, shifted uncomfortably as he glanced at the empty room. It was a gray October Monday in Atlanta, the kind where the sky couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten to. Jeremiah never liked uncertainty. "Mrs. Hampton, would you like to wait a few more minutes?" he asked gently, checking his watch. "We can begin," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. Jeremiah disliked delays. The pastor, a man who had never actually met my husband, began speaking in polite, rehearsed phrases about goodness and fond memories. I kept my eyes fixed on the white lilies arranged on top of the casket. Jeremiah would have preferred something simpler, maybe the deep red roses from our backyard that he cared for every year without fail. I sat alone in the front row. 5 empty seats surrounded me like a quiet accusation. Our children, their partners, our grandson, not one of them there. Kalen had texted the night before. "Sorry, Mom. Big meeting in Miami. Can't reschedule. I'll call next week." No real explanation. No effort to adjust his plans. I pictured him in a glass conference room, checking the time every so often, barely remembering what day it was. And then there was Anaya. She didn't even text. Her assistant called to say she was indisposed, as if we were talking about a family dinner, not the last goodbye to her father, the man who carried her on his shoulders when she was a child. After the brief service, I followed the casket outside. The wind felt sharp against my face, but I didn't cry. I'd shed so many tears over the past few weeks that I felt emptied out. When the casket was lowered, I let a handful of earth fall onto it. The hollow sound it made echoed the quiet inside our home. When I returned, everything looked exactly the same. His slippers beside the recliner, the remote in its familiar spot. 46 years of routines, now frozen in place. The silence pressed in on me. I poured a glass of the good bourbon we kept for special moments. This wasn't one, but somehow it felt right. On impulse, I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. The first post on my feed was from Anaya, uploaded 3 hours earlier, at the exact time of the funeral. She was on a yacht, smiling brightly, champagne raised high. The caption read, "Living my best life." My stomach tightened. She wasn't indisposed. She was celebrating while I stood alone beside her father's grave. Kalen had posted too. A selfie in a shiny conference room with a caption about closing important deals and building connections. Not a single mention of his father. I turned off my phone and took a slow sip of bourbon. In front of me hung a photograph from our 40th anniversary, the two of us smiling in front of the roses he planted when we first moved in. They were bright red then. Now, like him, they were fading. "Tomorrow," I said out loud, "I'm calling Attorney Owens." He'd been our lawyer for over 30 years. 2 years ago, he drafted our will, half to Kalen, half to Anaya, a small gift for our grandson, the house for them to share or sell, the mountain cabin for family trips. Back then, it had seemed fair. That evening, I opened the drawer where we kept important papers and found the folder labeled Last Will and Testament. The document inside felt like something from another lifetime, from a time when we still believed our children cared, when we thought responsibility and affection were one and the same. Later, as I lay in bed, my eyes drifted to Jeremiah's medication bottle still sitting on the nightstand. Those final months were long, full of hospital visits, quiet hopes, and painful setbacks. In all that time, Kalen visited twice, Anna came once, and stayed barely an hour. When Jeremiah passed on a calm Tuesday morning, I was holding his hand. He opened his eyes, gave me a faint smile, and whispered, "You were always the best part of me, Eliza." Then he slipped away. I called the children immediately. Kalen said he'd come for the weekend. Anna promised to take the first available flight. Neither of them arrived. The next morning, I phoned Attorney Owens. His secretary recognized my voice instantly. "Mrs. Hampton, my deepest condolences. We just heard about Mr. Jeremiah." "Thank you, Shonda. I need to meet with the attorney. It's important." "He can see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. "That works." I barely slept that night, not from doubt, but from a strange sense of clarity. It felt like Jeremiah was sitting beside me, quietly agreeing. Attorney Owens's office smelled of old books and fresh coffee. He stood when I entered, offering sincere condolences. I took the seat across from him. "I need to make changes to the will," I said. He nodded. "Of course. What would you like to revise?" "I want to remove Kaylin and Anaya entirely." His eyebrows lifted. "Completely?" "Yes, everything. The house, the cabin, the accounts, all of it should go to Demaney." "Your grandson?" "Yes." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Eliza, decisions made during deep grief can sometimes—" "I buried Jeremiah alone," I said calmly. "Not one of our children came. Anaya was celebrating on a yacht. Kaylin was in a meeting he could have moved. Meanwhile, Demaney called every day. He cut our grass when Jeremiah couldn't. He drove me to the hospital. He showed up, in ways his parents never did." For a moment, the room was quiet. "I understand," he finally said. "I'll prepare the new documents, but you should know, your children may challenge this after your passing." "They can try, but I want everything structured in the safest way possible," I said. "A trust for Demaney, one his parents can't touch." "That can be arranged," Attorney Owens replied, making a few precise notes. "Would you like any conditions for when he can access the funds?" "Just that he can't withdraw the full amount until he turns 30, unless it's for school or a medical need." "That's wise," he said, "especially for someone his age." He assured me he'd have the documents ready by the end of the week. As I left the office, something inside me eased. This wasn't spite. It wasn't payback. It was protection, an honest way to honor Jeremiah's memory by placing his legacy in the hands of the one person who had shown genuine care. I walked slowly to my car, watching a mother and her little girl pass by, laughing at a private joke. There was no bitterness in me anymore, just the quiet understanding that families don't always look like the ones smiling in holiday photos. That night, for the first time since Jeremiah's passing, I didn't sleep in his old sweater. I lay on our bed now, my bed, and let the silence wrap around me. It no longer felt hollow. It felt peaceful. Jeremiah always said, "Love doesn't demand attention, but it does deserve respect." Our children forgot that. I didn't. On a cloudy Thursday, I signed the new documents. I didn't hesitate not once. When you've buried your partner alone while your children post photos with champagne, paperwork stops feeling intimidating. "It's all set," Owen said as he gathered the pages. "Everything will stay private, but eventually, Kaylin and Anaya will learn about this." "I know," I said, slipping my pen into my purse, "and when they do, I'll be the one to tell them." Walking out, I felt something unfamiliar: freedom. Not happiness, not triumph. Freedom from pretending my children were still the people Jeremiah and I once hoped they'd become. At home, I opened a closet I hadn't touched in months. Inside were boxes labeled by year records of the life we poured into our children. Not just money, but effort, hours, hope. I pulled out the folder labeled Kaylin, Business and Education. Inside was a detailed history of expenses that added up to more than some people would see in a lifetime. His MBA at an expensive out-of-state school, the $70,000 seed money for the business that crumbled in less than a year, the $10,000 down payment for the oversized house he wanted to impress clients, the luxury car for professional image. Every time he asked, Jeremiah would sigh, then agree. "He's our son. One day he'll understand." That day never arrived. Next, I opened Anaya, personal. The extravagant wedding that cost as much as a condo. The penthouse renovations she said were necessary, the vacations to recover from stress, the private school for her son because it was essential, promises of more visits, more closeness promises that vanished as soon as the transfers cleared, Looking at those folders, the money wasn't what struck me hardest. It was the pattern, the expectation, the entitlement, the absence of gratitude, as if our savings were simply their early inheritance. I put the folders away, not out of regret, but as a record for myself, a reminder of what had been taken for granted. At exactly 7:32 p.m., my phone rang. Damani. "Grandma, can I stop by tomorrow? I found some books Grandpa would have loved, and I want to show you." My throat tightened. "Of course, sweetheart. Come for lunch." The next day, I made Jeremiah's favorite lasagna. Damani arrived right at noon, carrying a canvas bag of books and wearing the same warm smile his grandfather always had. We ate in the backyard and talked about simple things. He told me about school, his bookstore job, his dreams for graduate studies. He spoke with excitement, but without the frantic ambition his parents always carried. "You know," he said, scooping more salad, "I've been thinking about what Grandpa used to say, that success isn't about having a lot, but about needing little." I smiled. "He'd be proud of you, Damani." "You really think so?" he asked softly, that old childhood honesty in his voice. "I'm certain." After lunch, he washed the dishes despite my protests. As he dried the plates, he mentioned a research program in African American literature, but the cost worried him. "How much?" I asked casually. He told me. It was less than 1/10 of what his father once asked for a can't-miss investment. "Apply," I said simply. "But Grandma, it's expensive and I don't want—" "I know," I said gently. "Who do you think your grandfather and I saved all these years for?" He stopped, holding a perfectly dry plate, and didn't speak for a moment. "We saved for moments like this," I continued, "for someone who truly appreciates the chance." When he left with leftover lasagna, I watched his old car roll down the street. The difference between him and his parents had never been clearer. The next day my phone rang. Anaiya. Her first call since the funeral she skipped. "Mom," she began, sounding annoyed. "Damani told me you're paying for his research program." "No, hello?" "No, how are you?" I said calmly. "I'm just concerned," she insisted. "You just lost Dad. You shouldn't make big financial choices right now." I took a steady breath. "Actually, I've made quite a few important decisions lately." "What decisions?" The alarm in her voice had nothing to do with my well-being. "Why don't you come visit?" I replied. "We can talk in person." A pause. "I'm really busy with work, Mom. You know how it is." "Oh, I know exactly how it is," I said softly. "It's the same reason you couldn't come to your father's funeral while you were on a yacht with champagne." Silence. Then a strained whisper. "How did you know?" "Instagram," I replied. "You posted pictures during your father's burial." Another silence, followed by excuses. "Mom, that was complicated. I was dealing with a lot emotionally." "Spare me," I said calmly. "Come if you want to talk. If not, I'll assume you're too busy, like always." I ended the call before she could answer. My hands trembled not from anger, but from relief. Decades of holding back, staying quiet, pretending not to notice what was right in front of me. Finally coming to an end. Kalen appeared the next afternoon without warning, the way he always did when he needed something. His imported car swept into the driveway with the same dramatic flair that had always made me uneasy. "Mom," he said, giving me a brief hug. "You okay? You look tired." "I'm fine, Kalen," I replied. "What brings you here?" He looked around the living room, his eyes drifting over everything as if he were assessing it. "Anaiya told me what you two talked about. We're concerned." "Are you?" I asked softly. "Of course," he replied, settling comfortably on Jeremiah's old sofa. "Losing Dad was tough for all of us." "I imagine it was," I said, "though some of us seemed to handle it better than others." He actually looked embarrassed for a moment. "Look, Mom, about the funeral. I really couldn't cancel that meeting. It was important for the business." "I know," I said, sitting across from him. "The same business your father and I invested $70,000 in." His eyes widened. "I almost never mentioned these things." "That was a long time ago," he muttered. "Yes, just like the $120,000 we helped you with for your house. and the $45,000 to clear your debts after your first marriage, and the— Why are we talking about this now? He cut in, uneasy. Because your father is gone, I said gently, and I'm taking stock not just of finances, but of the choices we made. He shifted, suddenly alert. What are you saying? I updated the will, I said evenly. You and your sister are no longer included. His jaw dropped. Removed? Mom, you can't just— I can, I said quietly, and I already did. Everything will go to Damani. Damani? His voice jumped in pitch. My nephew is basically a kid. He's 22, he's a college graduate, and he has more integrity in one fingertip than you've shown in decades. Kaylin jumped up, his face red. This is ridiculous, you're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. On the contrary, I replied calmly, this is the clearest I've felt in years. Your father built everything here through hard work and strong values. Values you and your sister have long forgotten. So this is about the funeral, he snapped. I apologized. No, I said. The funeral was simply the final punctuation on a very long story. A story of taking without giving, asking without gratitude, treating your parents like a financial resource instead of people who loved you. He hesitated, then softened his voice. Let's talk this through. Maybe there's a compromise. There's nothing to negotiate, I said. My decision is final. You're going to regret this, he warned, grabbing his keys. Ani and I can challenge it. You're welcome to try, I replied, but it would only prove exactly what I'm talking about. He slammed the door behind him. Through the window, I saw him immediately lift his phone, no doubt calling his sister, the two of them already planning how to change my mind. That night, I opened a bottle of the good bourbon Jeremiah and I saved for meaningful occasions. I poured a glass and stepped into the yard. The roses Jeremiah had cared for so faithfully were starting to give in to autumn, but a few determined blossoms were still holding on, just like me. I remembered something he once said, love is like these roses, Eliza. It needs steady care, and sometimes it needs to survive a winter before it can bloom again. Our winter had arrived, and I was ready for it. 3 quiet days passed. No calls from my children, only sweet, thoughtful texts from Damani asking if I needed anything from the store. The stillness felt like the pause before a storm, and the storm arrived on Thursday. A shiny BMW pulled into the driveway. Anaya stepped out with her husband, Malik. She didn't knock. She never did. She walked in as though the house were still half owned by her. Mom, she announced, setting her designer bag down sharply. We need to talk. Malik hovered behind her, awkward and distracted, as usual. Good morning to you too, Anaya, I said, watering my plants. Is it true what Kaylin told me? She demanded. I set the watering can aside and looked at my daughter, my mirror in appearance, but a stranger in spirit. That depends on what he told you. That you erased us from the will, that everything goes to Damani. This is outrageous, Mom. I motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then perched stiffly on the sofa. Malik remained standing, eyes glued to his phone. It's not outrageous, I said. It's the consequence of a long chain of choices. A consequence of what? She snapped. Missing one funeral? Her tone cut deeper than she knew. It wasn't just the funeral. It was the lack of respect, the absence of empathy, the refusal to acknowledge the weight of the moment. You think this is only about the funeral? I asked quietly. She crossed her legs sharply. What else would it be? I inhaled slowly. Your father was ill for 6 months. 6 months during which you visited once, and even then you left early claiming a work emergency. 6 months when you didn't call to check on him. And when he passed, you chose a yacht trip over a final goodbye. I was processing things in my own way, she insisted. People grieve differently. That wasn't grief, I said gently. That was avoidance. She glanced at Malik for support, but he was still focused on emails. And what about Damani? She shot back. He barely knew Dad. Why should he get everything while we get nothing? The unfairness of that statement made me pause. Damani visited his grandfather every week. He read to him when his eyesight worsened. He helped manage the medications. He drove me to the hospital late at night. He knew him, Anaya, and more importantly, he cared. "This is not fair," she said, her voice rising. "We're entitled to that inheritance. It's ours." "No," I said softly. "It isn't. The assets are legally mine now, and I have the right to decide where they go." Malik finally put down his phone. "Mrs. Hampton," he said gently, "we're just worried about you. Decisions made during grief can be—" "Please don't pretend to be concerned, Malik," I said firmly. "Neither of you showed concern for me or Jeremiah unless there was something to gain." The room went still. Anaya stared at me, truly shocked not by the truth itself, but by the fact that I had finally spoken it aloud. "How can you say that?" she whispered. "We're your family." "Family?" My voice was steady, almost quiet. "Family shows up, family calls. Family is there during the difficult moments, not just for holidays and birthdays when there are gifts waiting." Anaya stood up, her cheeks flushed with anger. "You're being unkind. Dad would never have wanted this." "Your father," I said gently, "sat in that chair for 6 months waiting for his children to visit him one last time. He left this world disappointed. Please don't lecture me about what he would approve of." She snatched up her purse with hurried, jerky movements. "This isn't over, Mom. Kaylin is already speaking with an attorney. You can't just cut us out like this." "Actually," I replied softly, "I already have." When they left, I didn't slam the door. I closed it the same way I'd been moving through my life since Jeremiah's passing, calm, deliberate, and certain. I returned to the garden, picked up the watering can where I'd left it, and finished tending the azaleas Jeremiah loved so much. Then I sat in the rocking chair he built so many years ago. The phone rang inside. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. On the 4th ring, I finally answered. "Hello?" "Eliza, it's Charles." Our longtime neighbor's voice held genuine concern. "Is everything all right?" I saw Anaya leave in quite a hurry. Charles and his wife Lillian had been our neighbors for over 3 decades. They knew us, truly knew us. "I'm fine, Charles. Just closing some old chapters." "I understand," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "Lillian and I were wondering if you'd like to come for dinner tonight. Nothing fancy? Just company." I hesitated. Since losing Jeremiah, I'd avoided social invitations, but the thought of spending an evening with people who truly cared felt comforting. "I'd love to. Thank you." That evening, sitting at their cozy table with the familiar smell of home-cooked gumbo, I told them everything. The funeral, the decision about the will, the confrontations. Lillian reached for my hand. "You did what you needed to do," she said softly. "Jeremiah would have understood." "They're still my children," I whispered, finally allowing tears to fall. "How did we end up here?" Charles, ever steady, poured more sweet tea. "Sometimes people take roads we can't make sense of. You and Jeremiah gave them every opportunity, every kindness. What they did with those things was their choice." Lillian nodded. "Some people don't realize what they have until it's no longer there." "And what about Damani?" I asked quietly. "Am I making the right decision?" "That young man has a good head and a good heart," Charles said firmly. "Jeremiah always said so. If Kaylin and Anaya had half his character, things would look very different." I went home feeling lighter, not because the decision had changed, but because I'd finally shared the weight of it. The next morning, a letter arrived in handwriting I recognized immediately. Kaylin. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten letter, a rarity from him. I took it outside with my tea. The envelope was heavier than expected. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything you said. Maybe you're right about some things. I haven't been the son I should have been these last few years. I let work and life take priority, and without meaning to, I pushed you and Dad aside. About the funeral, I have no excuse. I should have been there. That will always stay with me. As for the will, I understand why you're disappointed, even though it hurts. Damani is a good kid. Maybe we can talk about a fair arrangement, something that reflects your concerns without cutting us off completely. We're still family. Love, Kaylin. I read it 3 times. It was conciliatory, almost warm. Almost. The line about a fair arrangement revealed the real intention, not healing but negotiation. Still, it was something. I set the letter aside. Words on paper couldn't erase years of absence, or the image of Jeremiah waiting by the window for visits that never came. Later that afternoon, Damani arrived with a toolbox. "Grandma, the back porch railing looked loose. Thought I'd fix it." I watched him work. Patient, focused, so much like Jeremiah. The way he measured twice before cutting, the careful way he tightened each screw. "Damani," I said when he finished, "there's something I need to tell you." We sat together on the newly repaired porch while I explained the changes to the will. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stared down at his hands. "Grandma, I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything special." "That," I said softly, "is exactly why you deserve it. You didn't expect anything. You were present because you cared, not because there was something to gain." "Mom and Uncle Kaylin are going to be angry," he murmured. "They already are." He looked troubled. "I don't want to be the reason for more conflict." I held his hands, rough, hard-working hands that reflected everything Jeremiah used to respect. "Your grandfather built this life through honesty and effort. He valued people who lived the same way. You are the right person to carry his legacy." His eyes grew moist. "I'll do my best, Grandma." "I know you will." He left with leftover lasagna, and I stayed on the porch until the sky shifted from gold to purple, and the stars began to appear. "Am I doing the right thing, Jeremiah?" I asked softly. The quiet around me felt warm, as though the universe itself was answering. A week later, Attorney Owens called. "Eliza, just letting you know, Kaylin contacted me." I sighed. What did he want? He asked whether the will had already been filed. When I confirmed it had, he asked about possible challenges. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that your decision is your right, and the document is solid." "Thank you," I said gently. "He also mentioned wanting to speak with you again. He says he has a compromise proposal." "I imagine he does." After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, the one Jeremiah and I sat at every morning for almost 50 years, the table where homework was done, candles were blown out, and life was built. I took out a notebook and began writing, not a legal document, but a letter. Something Kaylin and Anaya would read when I was gone, not to accuse, but to explain. "My dear children, if you're reading this, I am no longer here. I want you to know that my choices were not made out of anger. They were made out of truth, the truth of what our family became. I wrote for hours. About love, about distance, about the small moments that build a life, and the many they missed. I wrote about Jeremiah's hopes, about my hopes, about how love doesn't vanish even when it is hurt again and again. A mother's love remains, even when it learns to protect itself." I finished the letter, sealed it, and wrote on the front, "To be opened after my passing." I placed it gently in the same drawer where Jeremiah kept all of his most cherished papers. It felt right, a final message saved beside the man who shaped so much of my life. At exactly 10 a.m. the next morning, the doorbell rang. Kaylin stood on the porch, not in his crisp business suit but in jeans and a simple shirt, clothes that made him look younger, almost fragile. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in. He looked around slowly, taking in the house as though it were unfamiliar terrain. "You changed the curtains," he said. "Yes," I replied. 2 years ago." He nodded with a small flush of embarrassment. "May I sit?" I motioned toward the sofa. He sat on the edge, stiff, like a guest in a place he once ran through with childish laughter. "I got your letter," I said, "and Attorney Owens updated me." "Mom," he interrupted, "before you go further, I know we disappointed you. I know we weren't the children you and Dad deserved." "No," I said gently. "You weren't." He blinked, surprised that I didn't soften the truth as I always used to. "About the will," he continued, "I thought of a compromise that could work for everyone. A solution that acknowledges your concerns. I'm listening. Anaya and I agree that Damani deserves something substantial. He was there when we weren't, so we thought perhaps 50% for Damani and 25% for each of us." I studied him. My son, the boy whose first steps I celebrated, whose scraped knees I bandaged, whose future I wanted so badly to protect. And here he was, speaking in percentages. "Kaylin," I said softly, "this isn't a negotiation. This isn't a business proposal. This is a decision based on who truly understood the value of what your father and I built." "But we're your children," he insisted, frustration threading through his voice. "Shouldn't that matter?" "It did matter," I answered. "That's why your father and I spent decades helping you. The tuition for your MBA, the house down payment, the debts, the countless expenses, big and small. You and your sister already received far more than any inheritance could offer." He opened his mouth, then closed it, the realization settling in. For the first time, I saw something shift in him. Not anger, but comprehension. A shadow of understanding of everything he had overlooked. "I really messed up," he whispered. "Didn't I?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He stood slowly. "I'm going to think about all this, Mom." "You do that." At the door, he paused. "I miss him," he said softly. "Dad, I don't think I understood how much until it was too late." "I miss him too," I replied. "More than I can say." When he left, I returned to the porch. The roses Jeremiah trimmed so carefully were just beginning to show green shoots, tiny signs of life on branches I once thought were dead. And I wondered if something subtle was stirring in Kaylin as well. Not enough to change the will, that decision was final, but enough to spark the beginnings of reflection. And maybe that small shift was worth more than any inheritance. Spring came quietly, painting the yard in soft colors. The roses bloomed again, steady, resilient, just like Jeremiah. I spent my mornings on the porch watching butterflies, birds, and the gentle rhythm of life returning. 6 months passed, 6 months of small steps, silent understandings, and slow healing. Kaylin called once a week now, not for money, not for favors, but simply to ask how I was doing. Short, somewhat awkward conversations, but real. Anaya was different. After our confrontation, she pulled away. She sent occasional light messages but avoided anything meaningful, especially the topic of her father or the will. Distance was her way of coping. But Damani, he became a steady presence. Sunday lunches, thoughtful gifts, shared stories, never extravagant, always heartfelt. A rare plant, a handmade bookmark, a mug with a quote from Jeremiah's favorite poet. He remembered what mattered. One Sunday, he arrived carrying a thick folder. "What's that?" I asked as we prepared lunch together. He smiled, that shy, earnest smile Jeremiah used to wear. "A project I want to show you before I begin." After lunch, he laid out blueprints, sketches, cost estimates. "Remember when we talked about doing something meaningful with the house and the cabin?" he asked. "I've been working on it." He pointed to a set of drawings. "Here, the cabin. I want to turn it into a small community library. There's nothing like that nearby, and a lot of kids could really benefit." I examined the plans, moved by the care in every line. "And this one," he continued, showing another layout, "is for the main house. Not now, one day. A community center for older adults. Classes, workshops, a place where people can gather." I looked at him, at the man he was becoming. Someone who saw spaces not as symbols of status, but as ways to serve others. "Your grandfather would have adored this," I whispered. "Remember how he always said a house shouldn't sit empty when it could be filled with purpose?" I remembered well. "Damani," I said, "these plans are wonderful, but they're expensive." "I know," he said. "I'm saving, and some friends from school offered to help with designs. "Why don't we start now?" I asked. His head shot up. "Now? But you don't need to—" "Damani," I interrupted gently. "I'm almost 80. I want to see this dream come to life while I'm still here." The smile that spread across his face was worth more than any possession. The next week we went to the bank. We opened a joint account, and I transferred enough for him to begin the cabin project. Not everything. I still protected my own needs, but enough to bring his vision to life. The bank manager, who'd known Jeremiah and me for decades, smiled. Jeremiah would be proud. "Yes," I said softly. "He always believed money was just a tool. What mattered was how you used it." Outside, Damani looked overwhelmed. "Grandma, I promise I'll do everything right. Every dollar will have a purpose." "I know," I said, squeezing his arm. "That's why we're doing this." But word travels quickly in a small town. Kaylin called that evening. "Mom, I heard you and Damani opened a joint account." For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain. "Yes," I said simply. "We did." A pause. "Can I ask why?" "To fund a project," I replied. "What kind of project?" "Damani is turning the cabin into a community library." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I understand." Kaylin's voice sounded strangely subdued, controlled. "That's actually an interesting idea." "It was his idea," I said, "entirely his." "Well," he replied, clearing his throat, "if you need help with paperwork or permits, anything legal, really, I'm here." The offer caught me completely off guard. "Thank you, Kaylin," I said softly. "I'll let Damani know." After we hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. That was not the reaction I expected, not even close. The next morning, Anaya arrived. No luxury SUV, no dramatic entrance, just her in a modest, unfamiliar little car. "Mom," she said at the door, "can we talk?" I stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen table, the same place where every meaningful conversation in our family had once happened. She looked different today. Softer, less decoration, less armor. "I heard about Damani's project," she said. "The library, at the cabin." I waited for the anger, the accusation, the entitlement. Instead, she surprised me. "I think it's a wonderful idea." "You do?" She nodded, staring at her coffee. "Dad always talked about doing something like that," she continued. "Remember? He dreamed of creating a reading space for kids in the neighborhood." Of course I remembered. It was one of Jeremiah's dreams that he kept postponing. For retirement, for when the kids finished school, for when he had more time. And that time never came. "Damani remembered," I said. "I should have paid more attention too," she whispered. Silence fell between us, broken only by the quiet ticking of the kitchen clock. "I'm getting a divorce," she said suddenly. "What?" She let out a small, uncertain laugh. "Ironic, isn't it? After all the money you and Dad poured into that wedding." I didn't know how to respond. She and Malik had been together nearly 20 years, but rarely looked happy. "What happened?" I finally asked. She sighed, a long, tired sigh. "I realized we built a life based on appearances. A house too big, a car too expensive, parties too elaborate, and no real connection behind any of it." Then she looked straight into my eyes. Something she hadn't done in a long time. "When you changed the will, I started thinking about what actually matters, about who actually matters. Mom, you were right." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I became the kind of person Dad always warned me not to be. Someone who values things more than people, and I lost the chance to tell him goodbye." "It's never too late to change, Anaya," I said gently. "For some things." "It is," she whispered. "But I can still try to honor what Dad believed in." That afternoon, I drove her to the cemetery. She knelt at Jeremiah's grave, her hand resting gently on the stone, her shoulders trembling. A goodbye that came too late, yet perhaps still in time for her own healing. On the drive home, she asked, "Can I help with Damani's project? I know marketing. I could help with outreach, book donations." "Damani will appreciate that," I said. "Talk to him." She hesitated. "After everything, do you think he'd want my help?" "Damani doesn't hold grudges," I said. "In that, he's just like his grandfather." The following Sunday, for the first time in years, all three of them, my children and my grandson, sat at the same table. The air was tense at first, awkward glances, careful sentences, but slowly, something shifted. Kaylin asked genuine questions about the library plans. Anaya offered smart ideas for outreach. Damani responded kindly, even laughed at one of Kaylin's clumsy jokes. It wasn't perfect. Old wounds don't heal over one meal. But it was a beginning. Later, while we drank coffee on the porch, Kaylin cleared his throat, his nervous habit since childhood. "Damani," he said, "your project with Grandma is excellent. It's exactly the kind of thing Dad would have supported." Damani blinked, surprised, moved. "Thank you, Uncle." "If you need help with legal matters," Kaylin added, "I'm here." "And I can help with the marketing," Anaya said. "I already have ideas for a website and social media." Damani looked at me, confused by the sudden cooperation. I smiled softly. "That sounds great," he said. "I'm planning to start renovations next month." And just like that, something small but precious took root. Not full forgiveness, not a rewriting of the past, but a quiet willingness to step into a better future. After they left, I sat alone on the porch, looking out at the garden Jeremiah and I tended for decades. The roses were blooming, vibrant, stubborn, alive. "Would you call this a new beginning?" I asked the breeze. "Or just convenience?" In my heart, I could almost hear Jeremiah's voice, wry and gentle. "Maybe it's both, Eliza, and maybe what matters is that everyone grows from it." That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months. Renovation began on a bright Monday morning in April. Damani arrived with a group of friends, architecture students, volunteers, helpers, and, remarkably, Kaylin and Anaya. Kaylin came early, wearing jeans and an old shirt I didn't know he owned. He brought already approved permits. "Used a few contacts," he said. "Least I can do." Not long after, Anaya showed up with boxes of pastries and coffee for the group. Her hair was in a plain ponytail, her clothes simple. She carried her laptop and a list of local donors. "I've already launched social media outreach," she said, showing me the website she built for the future Jeremiah Hampton Community Library. "We've already collected pledges for over 500 books." I watched as my children worked alongside their nephew, Kaylin holding ladders, guiding volunteers, Anaya organizing supplies, planning events, both of them listening to Damani with a humility I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, old shadows, quiet moments when Jeremiah's name brought a bittersweet hush. But there was something new, something real. By the end of the first day, we were all sitting on the porch, tired but content. Kaylin had dust on his designer pants. Anaya had paint streaks in her hair. Damani was glowing with quiet pride. "Grandpa would have loved this," Damani said. "He would have," Kaylin replied, surprising us all. "He always believed in creating spaces where people could grow. I think I'm finally beginning to understand." Anaya nodded as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the weeks that followed, a rhythm emerged. Kaylin brought materials at discounted prices. Anaya coordinated community events and gathered donations. Damani led with heart, patience, and vision, the true center of it all. And somehow, against all odds, a family that once felt broken began to find new ground beneath its feet. I watched everything unfold with a mixture of emotions. Joy, seeing the project finally take shape. Pride, watching the kind of man Damani had become. And a deep, complicated ache witnessing Kaylin and Anaya finally embody the qualities Jeremiah and I had always hoped to see in them. Too late for him to witness it, but not too late for them to grow. One afternoon, I found Anaya alone inside the cabin, sorting through the children's books that had been donated. She ran her fingers along the bright covers, arranging them carefully on the shelves. "It's a good start," I said, stepping inside. She nodded. "You know what's strange? I'm enjoying this more than my actual job." "That's not strange at all," I replied. "Your father always said that doing something for others brings a kind of fulfillment money can't touch." A soft, wistful smile appeared on her face. "He said that to me so many times," she whispered. "I just wasn't listening." We stood quietly for a moment before she spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Mom, about the will." I looked at her gently. "I understand why you did it," she said. "And truly, it's okay. Damani deserves it. He was there when we weren't." She placed one last book on the shelf, aligning it with care. "But I want you to know something," she continued. "I'm not doing this because of the will. I'm not trying to earn my way back so you'll change your mind." "I know," I said softly. And I realized it was true. This had never really been about money. It had always been about presence, values, and the simple act of showing up. "Dad would be happy about this," she whispered, looking around the cabin. "All of us working together on something that matters." A few weeks later, Kaylin arrived early one Saturday, carrying supplies for the new bookshelves. "I sold the car," he announced casually as we unloaded the boards. I stopped mid-step. "Which car?" I asked, though I already knew. "The imported one," he admitted. "The one you and Dad always said was too much." I stared at him stunned. "Why?" He shrugged, but there was a quiet sincerity in his eyes. I realized I didn't need it. It was more about showing off than anything useful. He paused, then added, "I used some of the money to set up a scholarship at the community college. In Dad's name." My breath caught. For a moment, I saw not the man burdened by ambition, but the boy he used to be, the boy who had once given away his allowance so a classmate could buy medicine, the teenager who spent afternoons helping seniors learn computers. "Your father would be proud," I said simply. Damani was the most surprised by the gradual transformation of his aunt and uncle. One afternoon, while we worked together in the garden behind the library, he finally asked, "Grandma, I don't understand. 6 months ago, they barely visited. Now they're here almost every day. What changed?" I thought for a moment, pulling a stubborn weed from the soil. "Sometimes people lose their way," I said finally. "They chase the things they think matter, money, status, success, and forget what's truly important." He nodded slowly. "And sometimes," I added, "it takes something big to remind them, like your grandfather's passing, or me changing the will." "Do you think I should trust this change?" he asked, frowning slightly. "Is it real?" I smiled at him, my thoughtful, wise grandson. "Trust," I said gently, "but keep your eyes open. Time reveals the truth of people's hearts better than anything else." 2 months after the renovation began, the Jeremiah Hampton Community Library was nearly ready. Fresh paint, sunlit reading tables, shelves full of donated books. A warm, welcoming space that felt alive with purpose. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in June. Anaya handled it all. Invitations, local news coverage, even a small breakfast for the first visitors. That morning, I arrived early. I wanted a quiet moment alone before the crowd came. Sunlight poured through the large new windows, casting bright patterns across the restored floorboards. The circular shelves, Damani's idea, created little discovery nooks throughout the space. On the main wall hung a framed photo of Jeremiah in his garden, smiling, a book in one hand and a gardening tool in the other. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of Jeremiah Hampton, who believed that books and gardens are places where dreams grow." Tears ran down my face before I knew they had fallen. "He would have loved this," I whispered. "He's seeing it," Damani said softly behind me. I hadn't noticed him enter. He wore a clean dress shirt and polished shoes for the opening. "In some way," he continued, "he's here, with us." I nodded, unable to speak. Damani slipped an arm around my shoulders. I never could have done this without you, Grandma. It wasn't me, I replied. It was you. Your work. Your heart. But I could only do it, he said gently, because you and Grandpa taught me what truly matters, and because you weren't afraid to make a painful choice when it had to be made. Kaylin and Anaya arrived together, both nervous. Kaylin held a box filled with business books, not the flashy titles he once favored, but thoughtful works on ethics and social responsibility. Anaya brought a bouquet of fresh flowers and a beautiful leather-bound guest book. It's for the library, she said, so people can write messages, memories. The story of this place starts today. The opening exceeded every expectation. Families, children, teachers, seniors, all filling the space with laughter and curiosity. A retired librarian offered to train volunteers. Parents proposed after-school reading sessions. Teachers brainstormed book clubs. And through it all, Kaylin stood in a corner talking passionately with young men about mentorship. Anaya coordinated volunteer lists and chatted eagerly with donors. Damani moved through the room like he'd been doing this for years, connecting people, sharing ideas, building bridges. Our lifelong neighbors, Charles and Lillian, stood beside me, watching it all. Jeremiah would be beaming, Lillian whispered. Yes, I said softly. He really would. Charles nodded toward my children. Look at them, he said. They almost look like they did when they were young. He was right. Something soft, something genuine had returned to them. Maybe it had been buried under ambition. Maybe it just needed time. Or loss. Or love. Sometimes, I said, we lose sight of what matters, and sometimes, thankfully, we find our way back. When the crowd thinned and the day wound down, I gathered with my children and my grandson on the small patio behind the library, in the rose garden Damani planted to honor his grandfather. Kaylin lifted a glass of iced tea. Kaylin lifted his glass of iced tea. He had given up alcohol months ago, another quiet transformation none of us expected. To Jeremiah, he said softly, who taught us more than we ever acknowledged. To Jeremiah, we echoed together. That evening, as we walked back to my home, Kaylin, Anaya, Damani, and me, there was a different feeling in the air. Not complete reconciliation. Some wounds are too old and too deep. But there was honesty, respect, a sense of something real beginning to mend. We sat on the porch the way we used to when the kids were young, and life felt simple. The warm night carried the scent of roses and honeysuckle. We didn't talk about heavy things. We talked about the neighbors, the weather, the library's progress, trivial things that felt warm simply because we were saying them together. Then Kaylin cleared his throat. That familiar sign he was about to say something that mattered. Mom, he began, I've been thinking a lot these past months about Dad, about our choices, about the will. My heart tightened. Was he going back to it? Was all this progress just temporary? Kaylin, I started, but he lifted his hand gently. Please, let me finish. It's not what you think. He took a breath. You were right, he said, about everything. We didn't honor what you and Dad believed in. We weren't present when we should have been. And the decision you made was the right one. I looked at him, stunned. I could see the boy he once was, and the man he was finally becoming. It's true, Anaya added quietly. Damani deserves everything you decided to give him. He understands the value of what you and Dad built, not the financial part, the real part. Damani looked uncomfortable. We don't need to talk about this. Yes, Kaylin insisted gently. We do. We need to clear the air. He looked at me again. Mom, we want you to know we respect your decision. We'll never contest it, and we're not helping with the library or showing up now for money. We're doing it because we finally understand what Dad tried to teach us. Anaya nodded. That real value isn't in what you own, she said softly, but in what you build, in the connections you nurture, in the good you leave behind. I looked at my children, who for so long had felt distant, almost like strangers. and for the first time in years, I saw reflections of Jeremiah in them. Not perfect echoes, but real ones. "Your father would be proud of you both," I said, taking their hands. "And so am I." Later that night, after everyone had gone, the house grew still again. I went to the bedroom Jeremiah and I had shared for most of our lives. I opened the drawer and took out the letter I had written to my children, the one meant to be read after I was gone. I read it slowly. The disappointment woven into the words, the explanations, the love that remained despite the hurt. It was all true when I wrote it, but now it felt like a letter from a different time, a different version of us. I folded it gently and placed it back in the drawer. Maybe I would rewrite it someday, or maybe I didn't need to. Some truths don't need to be preserved on paper, they live in actions, in everyday kindnesses. Jeremiah always believed that. And at last, his children were beginning to understand it too. The first anniversary of Jeremiah's passing arrived with autumn. The trees glowed in the golden shades he loved. The air carried that bittersweet mix of beauty and melancholy that October brings. The library, his library, had become more successful than any of us imagined. Children rushed there after school. Seniors gathered for book clubs. Teenagers found quiet corners to study. And Damani, with steady dedication, had become its heartbeat, organizing programs, mentoring volunteers, shaping a dream into something real. Kaylin and Anaya stayed involved too. Kaylin had started a mentorship program for local youth, using his connections to open doors. Anaya organized fundraising events and kept the community engaged. That morning I woke early, a habit from decades with Jeremiah, who loved sunrises. I made myself tea and sat on the porch as dawn painted the sky. 1 year, Jeremiah, I whispered. It feels like forever, and no time at all. I planned to go to the cemetery alone. I hadn't told the children the date. I didn't want them to feel obligated. Some journeys must be taken quietly. But as I gathered my coat, the sound of cars arriving pulled my attention to the window. Kaylin stepped out of his car. No flashy import, just a simple, practical model. Behind him, a second car parked. Damani and Anaya emerged together. I opened the door before they could knock. "We thought you might want company today," Damani said, holding a bouquet of Jeremiah's red roses. I looked at them, my children and grandson, dressed simply, their expressions sincere, gentle, understanding. "I'd love that," I said. The cemetery was peaceful that autumn morning. Dry leaves rustled with each breeze. We walked together to Jeremiah's grave, a simple headstone just as he wanted. Damani placed the roses with great care. Kaylin set down a small stone, a gesture he had learned from recent spiritual studies. Anaya opened a book of poems Jeremiah loved, reading softly into the crisp air. I stepped back as they remembered him in their own ways. When she finished, Kaylin approached the stone. "Dad," he said quietly, "it took me a long time to understand what you tried to teach me, about integrity, about showing up, about what really matters." His voice trembled. "I know it's late to tell you, but I hope wherever you are, you can see that I'm trying." Then Anaya stepped forward. "Daddy," she whispered, tears rising, "I miss you. I miss your stories, your laughter, your guidance, even the advice I pretended not to hear. Thank you for never giving up on me." Finally, Damani knelt by the grave. He didn't speak, just placed his hand on the stone, holding it gently. When he stood, he left something behind, a small brass key, the key to the library. I stepped forward alone. My children and grandson moved back to give me space. "Jeremiah," I murmured, kneeling with effort, "look at what's happened since you left. It's not the path we imagined, is it? Life rarely is." I touched the cold stone. "But maybe this was the way it had to happen. Maybe we needed the shock to find our way home." My voice broke as I whispered, "I love you." He had recently stopped drinking, just one of the many quiet changes I'd watched unfold in him. Kaylin lifted his glass and said, "To Jeremiah, who taught us more than we ever realized." "To Jeremiah," we repeated. As we walked back to the cars, Kaylin, Anaya, Damani, and me, there was a different feeling in the air. Not complete healing, some wounds leave marks. But something had shifted, understanding, respect, a willingness to move forward together. Later, on my porch, we sat the way we used to when the children were small, when life felt simpler. The warm night carried the scent of roses and honeysuckle. We talked about nothing and everything, the neighbors, the weather, the library's next steps. Then Kaylin cleared his throat, his signal since childhood that something heartfelt was coming. "Mom," he began, "I've been thinking a lot these past months, about Dad, about us, about the will." My chest tightened. Was he returning to old arguments? "Kaylin," I began, but he gently lifted his hand. "Please, just let me finish. It's not what you think." He took a breath, steadying himself. "You were right," he said. "We didn't honor what you and Dad valued. We weren't there the way we should have been, and the decision you made was the right one." I stared at him, amazed, moved. "It's true," Anaya said softly. "Damani deserves what you chose to leave him. He understands not the financial value, but the real one." Damani looked embarrassed. "We don't have to talk about this." "We do," Kaylin insisted, "to clear the air completely. Mom, we respect your decision. We won't challenge it, and we're not helping with the library for any inheritance. We're doing it because we finally understand what Dad spent his life teaching us." Anaya nodded. "That what matters isn't what you collect, but what you contribute. Not what you own, but the good you create." I looked at my grown children, who had once felt so distant, and I finally saw pieces of Jeremiah in them, imperfect, but present. "Your father would be proud of you," I said, squeezing their hands. "And I am too." That night, after everyone had gone and the house returned to silence, I sat in the bedroom I once shared with Jeremiah. I opened the drawer and took out the letter I had written for my children, the one meant for after my passing. I read it carefully. The disappointment, the painful truths, the love beneath everything. Those words were real when I wrote them. But now, they belong to another chapter, to a family that no longer existed in the same way. I folded the letter and placed it back. Maybe I'd rewrite it someday, or maybe I didn't need to. Some truths don't live on paper, they live in daily choices, in gestures of kindness, in the quiet ways love repairs broken places. Jeremiah always knew that, and finally, beautifully, his children were beginning to understand it too. Jeremiah's first anniversary came with the fall. Golden leaves, his favorite kind, covered the ground. The air carried that special mix of sorrow and beauty that October always brings. The community library had blossomed into something larger than any of us predicted. Children poured in after school, seniors gathered for book clubs, teenagers found a peaceful place to study, and Damani, my steady, thoughtful grandson, spent nearly all his free time there, guiding volunteers, building programs, nurturing the space into something vibrant and alive. Kaylin and Anaya stayed involved, each in their way. Kaylin created a mentorship program for youth who needed guidance. Anaya organized fundraisers and community events, ensuring the library kept growing. On the morning of the anniversary, I woke early out of habit. Jeremiah and I watched the sunrise together for decades. My body still remembered. "1 year, Jeremiah," I whispered. "So much has changed, and yet it still feels like yesterday." I planned to visit the cemetery alone. I hadn't told the children. I didn't want obligation to bring them there. But as I lifted my purse, I heard the sound of cars. Kaylin stepped out of his, no longer the flashy one, but a simple, modest sedan. Damani and Anaya arrived right behind him. Before they could knock, I opened the door. "We thought you might want company today," Damani said, holding a bouquet of Jeremiah's red roses. Their expressions were sincere, gentle, and full of understanding. "I'd love that," I said. The cemetery was quiet. Leaves rustled along the path. Jeremiah's headstone, simple just as he had wanted, stood dignified in the soft morning light. Damani placed the roses. Kaylin set down a small stone, a recent tradition he'd adopted. Anaya opened a book of Jeremiah's favorite poems and read softly. I stepped back as they honored him in their own ways. Then Kaylin approached the stone. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "It took me too long to understand what mattered: integrity, presence, responsibility. I know I'm telling you this late, but I hope you can see I'm trying." Anaya stepped forward. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I miss you. Your stories, your laugh, your advice, even the advice I pretended to ignore. Thank you for never giving up on me." Then came Damani. He knelt in silence, placing his hand gently on the stone. When he rose, he left behind a small brass key, the key to the library. My turn. "Jeremiah," I whispered, kneeling with difficulty. "Look at what's happened since you left. It isn't the path we imagined, is it? Life rarely follows the plans we make." I touched the cool stone. "But maybe this was exactly what we needed to find our way home." I bowed my head. "I will always love you." And now, dear listener, did you enjoy this story? And from which city or country are you listening? Tell me in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. If this story touched your heart, you can support the channel with a super thanks. It truly helps me keep bringing more stories like this one. Thank you for your kindness and for being part of this journey. On the screen, you'll find 2 more life stories I highly recommend. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story, with love and respect.